Hello, everybody. Welcome or welcome back to Tiny Tiger Collective. I'm Helena, and today I thought I'd come to you with a video sharing 10 things I wish I knew before I started collecting fountain pens. Ever since starting this YouTube channel on New Year's Eve last year, I feel like we have cultivated such a special community of fountain pen enthusiasts, ranging from those of you who have used and collected fountain pens for many, many years, and those of you who have just started dipping your toes into the hobby and perhaps quite recently purchased your very first fountain pen or are considering purchasing your first fountain pen. So before I share my lessons learned with you, I wanted to provide a brief history of how I personally got into fountain pens. So I've always loved journaling, planning, and using analog tools. I remember even in university when digital recorders were all the rage for capturing lectures, I insisted on getting a single recorder that was available at the store, where even the sales attendant was shocked that I showed any interest, but I had to purchase the recorder that came with little mini cassettes that I would load in and actually record on tape. Little did I know that fountain pens would become such an enormous community and hobby 15 years later, but my heartstrings were tugged shortly after I completed my PhD, and I found myself living in Melbourne for my first academic role. And there I was walking around Melbourne CBD when I stumbled across Pen City. I went inside, and a very attentive staff member invited me to try one of the most classic beginner fountain pens, the Lamy Safari. And I think it's because, as a complete fountain pen newbie, my idea of fountain pens was solely grounded in the idea of the feather quill. And so the smoothness of the Lamy Safari was perhaps the first thing that surprised me and cinched the deal in terms of me diving into the world of fountain pens. However, I decided not to take the leap and walk home with a Lamy Safari that day, but instead I went online and I spent maybe about a week researching everything that I could about fountain pens. I had this sense that because I enjoyed riding with a Lamy Safari in store, that somehow that meant that all Lamies would feel and work exactly the same way. So after doing a little bit of research, I found a UK retailer and I purchased my first ever fountain pen, this Lamy CP1. Compared to the Safari I tried in store, I thought the CP1, with its matte black metal body and this stunning minimalistic brushed steel clip, would be much more in line with my aesthetic tastes. And I patiently awaited its delivery along with 4G Airborne inks that I purchased from the same online store. However, when I excitedly inked up this pen, I was absolutely horrified to find that it wrote nothing like my lovely experience with a Lamy Safari in store. Among the many, many things that were unsuitable about this pen, the very thin girth I found incredibly uncomfortable and fatiguing to hold for long writing periods. I also find that the threads on the grip section dug painfully into the cuticle of my middle finger, and it would become extremely raw and sore, and a couple of times even caused me to bleed. The way that I hold my pens, I found that the most comfortable was to hold it close to the nib. But as soon as I found that comfortable sweet spot for myself, I would very quickly discover that the ink had leaked all over my fingers. There was virtually no writing session that I could get out of using the Lamy CP1 that didn't cover at least 3 of my fingers in ink. So I did stick with this pen and used it virtually every day for several months. But after a while, I had to accept defeat and I rinsed this pen out, packed it away, and I didn't touch another fountain pen for almost 10 years. So believe me when I say that I've learned a lot of hard lessons over time, and I certainly don't share any of my advice from the perspective of some kind of self-appointed expert. So nearly 10 years later, I found myself unexpectedly with a newborn, rocking him, soothing him, nursing him into the wee hours of the morning. And in trying to stay awake so I didn't drop my poor baby, I would watch beautiful fountain pen videos that I was delighted to discover had completely exploded on the internet. When I first got into fountain pens back in 2013, I really had to contend myself with some blogs and websites. If there were videos about fountain pens on YouTube, they certainly weren't known to me. So I was thrilled to see brands like Jet Pens and Yoseka Stationery offer the most calming, soothing, but educational and insightful videos about fountain pens. So after many months of watching videos, I decided to take the leap and buy my second ever fountain pen. And I decided to take a leap and purchase a gold nib fountain pen. And that is this Pilot E95S in deep red. I just loved that it has this beautiful inlaid nib that looks like a elegant fingernail. And reading all the reviews, watching all the videos online, I felt fairly confident that this would give me a better writing experience. And it absolutely did. This completely redeemed the fountain pen hobby for me. And I fell headfirst back in love with fountain pens. And over the next year, you would see me assemble what is now my collection of various fountain pens in a variety of different brands, colors, designs, and formats. So let me get into the 10 lessons that I've learned about fountain pens that I wish I knew before I purchased my very first dreaded Lamy CP1. The first thing is that there is a pen, ink, and paper trifecta. So just because you like a pen doesn't mean that pen performs equally well with every single type of ink. So perhaps you have purchased your first pen, and to keep things easy, you plug in the cartridge that came with it. That's probably a good bet that your pen will perform at its optimum. So usually the brand of the pen will work well with a brand of ink cartridges that's provided in the box. But if you try to fill it with a different type of ink, you might be surprised to find that the pen doesn't perform as well as it did right out of the box. And that is because you have to test it with different types of inks. So this year, I had the great fortune of receiving this Benu hand-painted cherry blossom euphoria from Benu themselves. And when I first got this pen, I thought, wouldn't it be perfect to pair it with my Sailor Shikiori Yozakura, which means night cherry blossom? So I filled up the cartridge with Yozakura, only to find that it was actually feathering a lot on my papers. And I realized that my Benu is an incredibly wet writer, and my Sailor Shikiori Yozakura is an incredibly wet ink. And usually those two things are perfect on their own, but when paired together, my fine Benu wrote like a double broad. So I decided to test my theory by washing out my converter and refilling it with one of my drier inks, Diamine Shimmering Seas, which is a dark navy with gold shimmer. And it has written beautifully ever since. So the combination between the ink and the pen works a certain chemistry with each other. And just because the first time you try an ink or the first time you try a pen, it doesn't work as beautifully as expected, doesn't mean that there's necessarily something wrong with the ink or the pen. But maybe it just needs further experimentation with testing the right kind of ink with the right kind of pen. So the reverse is true as well. If I have a very dry writer, like my Platinum 3776 or my Pilot Vanishing Point, pairing it with a very wet ink, like Yozakura, like any of the Pilot Urashizuku inks, they tend to work much better. But a dry pen and a dry ink, as when I first inked up my Pilot Vanishing Point with Platinum Carbon Black, it was an absolute disaster. Hard starts, skips, and an all-round agonizing writing experience. So let me bring paper into the equation. Generally, there is a small range of famous fountain pen friendly papers, such as the Tomoe River paper in Hobonichi planners, the Midori MD paper, which can be found in Midori MD notebooks, as well as all the Travelers Company notebooks. There's also other fountain pen friendly papers that don't quite get as much attention, but really dedicated fountain pen lovers know that they are valuable parts of a collector's journey, such as Takasago paper, which can be found in the Yamanote notebooks, as well as on Dominant Industry swatch cards. Irofo is one that I haven't personally tried, but I've heard incredible things about, particularly its ability to show off fountain pen ink properties, and Rhodia and Clairefontaine paper. So even if you found the right ink and pen combination, when paper is added to the mix, there's yet another reaction. So again, if I have very wet inks or very wet pen, it becomes extremely juicy when I write on a coated paper like Tomoe River paper. Tomoe River paper shows off the properties of inks particularly well, like shimmer, sheen, and shading. However, when it's too wet, this is where not only do you see the feathering and the blooming happening, but you can also find it incredibly difficult to wait for the ink to dry on the page, leading to smearing and smudging, especially if you're a left-handed writer. Sometimes when the fountain pen nib is a little bit too smooth, and the metaphor I love to give is that it feels a little bit like you're writing with a whiteboard marker on the whiteboard and it's slipping and sliding all over the place on the page. I will try using that pen on something a little bit toothier, like my Traveler's notebooks or even Rhodia paper. And then if I have a nib that might be a little bit on the scratchier side, then I find having something coated and smooth like Tomoe River paper provides that perfect middle ground. So if right out of the box you don't like quite how a pen, an ink, or paper is performing, try it with different combinations of what you might have, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find the sweet spot in the trifecta. I wish I could also tell myself that not all nib sizes are created equal. The general rule of thumb is that the European brands, such as Lamy, Kaweiko's, they tend to write a lot more broad than Japanese pens. Japanese pens are designed to write kanji or the Chinese characters, and the intricacy of the various strokes requires often a finer nib in order to still create legible, defined characters. So for those reasons, when you know that the pen or the nib is manufactured by a European manufacturer, usually it's German, you would need to size down in order to get the kind of line width that you might be expecting if you're used to using Japanese fountain pens and vice versa. So my favorite nib size is generally a Japanese fine. So my all-time favorite pen, my Pilot Custom 823, is in a fine. And that to me is my ideal line width because I primarily use my fountain pens in my Hobonichi planners, which have a tiny 3.7 millimeter grid. So to fit my letters into these tiny grid sizes, I do like having a fine pen in order to keep my writing legible. That means if I am buying a German pen, such as my Lamy 2000, and indeed, Lamy did redeem itself after my not so positive experience with CP1, and my Lamy 2000 might be my second favorite pen in my collection. And I purchased this in an extra fine, and it still writes a touch more broad than my Pilot Custom 823 in the Japanese fine. That said, nib sizes vary even within the same brand. So an example is my Pilot Vanishing Point, also in a fine, writes more broad than the Pilot Custom 823. I have two Kaweco Sports. This one, AL, which is the one that's a full aluminium body, and then this Iridescent Sport, which is in a plastic body. Both these pens I bought in medium nibs, and I can tell you that my Iridescent Pearl, which is supposed to be an identical nib, writes more broad and is attached scratchier than the AL Sport. So this was a better performing nib, even though they have the exact same nib from the exact same manufacturer. Now, some brands are better known for consistency and quality control and rigorous testing than others. So that experience with two of the exact same Kaweco nibs performing dramatically differently is not necessarily the norm in fountain pens. I have three Sailor Pro Gear Slims. These two are your regular 14K gold nibs in medium fine. And this one, my lilac colored, is a special 21 carat bicolor gold nib, also in a medium fine. And I would say these three pens perform almost identically, and the line width, I think, virtually indetectably similar. The line width will also change based on the ink that you have. So if you have a very, very dry ink, it will write oh so finer than if you had a very wet ink that gushed out of the nib. My third lesson learned is that cleaning and maintenance are essential to the fountain pen hobby. And I'd say if you're interested in fountain pens, I'm willing to guess that you're someone who likes to slow down and appreciate beautiful writing instruments and the tactile feel of pen on paper. You're not necessarily someone who is looking to be quick, efficient, productive. If so, you're probably not going to gravitate towards the fountain pen hobby. Cleaning and maintenance, I would say, is part of the meditative, slow living charm of the fountain pen hobby. I admit that I'm not someone who is meticulously disciplined about cleaning my pens. But when I bought my first Lamy fountain pen, I didn't realize how often I needed to clean the pen. I also didn't know how to clean the pen. So I loaded it up and used it until it ran out, and then I would dip my nib back into the bottle and fill it back up again. And I didn't realize that a lot of the leaking that was happening may have been partially related to me not cleaning out the pen as well as I could have. So potentially dried ink was clogging up the feed, leading to it kind of burping and leaking out in other ways. I also know a few people who told me that they also had no idea they needed to clean out their fountain pens. And they just found that one day their fountain pen stopped working and they thought that it had broke. They threw the pen away, bought a new one, and then had it write beautifully for another few months until the same thing happened again. And it wasn't until maybe they threw out more pens that they'd like to admit that they discovered that all their pen needed was a really, really good rinse. And nowadays on YouTube, there are so many detailed tutorial videos showing you how to clean your fountain pens. And I know there are people who have discovered that simple everyday tools like a syringe bulb can help make the cleaning process more effective and efficient. I don't own a syringe bulb. I admit I just do it the old fashioned way, where I take my pen apart, rinse it under cold, clean running tap water. If I know that the ink has dried out a little bit in my pen before I started my washing process, I might leave the nib to soak for 15 minutes in a glass of clean water before I come back and then rinse it back out through running water. And that is often more than what I need, even when I've started using shimmer inks more regularly in my collection. The fourth advice I'd like to share is you absolutely do not need expensive pens to enjoy the hobby. And I mean that in two senses. So, yes, you don't need a dollar amount expensive pens. You don't need to buy the Grail pens that cost $300 plus dollars. And it is hard when you watch beautiful fountain pen collection tours on YouTube and other social media platforms, where it seems like an arsenal of Grail pens is what you need to prove that you've made it in the hobby. But it really is just a very specific quirk of the social media community itself. And that doesn't represent the entirety of the fountain pen hobby. And even if it did, who's to say that you can't be countercultural and counternormative? I am so lucky that I have a job that pays me a decent enough salary that I feel like I can splurge on pens within reason without it impacting my finances in any significant or negative way. I'm also very lucky that having this space on YouTube has given me opportunities that I never would have dreamed of, such as being contacted by Banu to receive this pen free of cost. However, I can't say that writing with a $300 pen has dramatically changed my relationship with writing and journaling, and it hasn't made me a better fountain pen user or writer than when I was using my Kavekos. Yes, when I bought the CP1 and absolutely hated the experience so much that it put me off fountain pens for almost a decade, that is not because that pen was cheap. And it really wasn't. I believe at the time I spent $90 or $100 Australian on that pen. It was really more about the fit and the feel. And that is so much more important than the price tag. There are many entry level, accessible, and affordable fountain pens that are known for being incredible writers. The Lamy Safari, which I enjoyed so much in store that I went and bought another Lamy thinking would be exactly the same experience. The Platinum Preppy, Pilot Kakuno, and the Twisby Eco are just some of the many accessible pens out there, not to even mention all of the Chinese brands like Asvine and Jinghao that have entered the market and opened up fountain pens to a segment of the market who may have never been able to afford fountain pens. Many of those pens have glowing reputations and they offer a great entryway into the fountain pen hobby. And there's absolutely no shame in starting or ending your fountain pen journey right there. Along a similar vein, There's also no need to own an entire walk-in wardrobe for a fountain pens if you don't want to, or if you can't afford to. I've often fantasized about giving away all of my fountain pens and only keeping my Pilot Custom 823. And that's usually after a long session writing with this pen. I just sigh in awe of how beautiful it is to hold, to write with, and it performs so well time and time again, no matter what ink and what paper I throw at it. If you're standing at the precipice of the fountain pen hobby and thinking, gosh, do I have to buy a gold nib pen? Do I have to buy a $500 Grail pen? Do I have to own 50 pens? And that doesn't feel aligned with you and your values, then just start with one entry level pen and see where that takes you. And if you love it and you don't see yourself wanting to grow your collection beyond that, then don't. And know that in your heart, it doesn't make you any less legitimate of a fountain pen user. I also wish I knew when I got into the hobby that ink properties do matter, and there's more to inks than simply the color. When I bought my first fountain pen, as I said, I bought 4 Gieban inks, and I chose them purely on the basis of their color. So I got a black and a brown that I thought would be my everyday conservative at work writers. And then I got a purple and a green for my fun out there, splash of life colors. What I didn't realize at that time was that fountain pen inks have a variety of properties other than just the color. They have shimmer, shading, and sheen. It is worth looking at the beautiful swatch videos that exist on YouTube and exploring all the different properties of fountain pen inks to see if any might tickle your fancy. If you're someone like me who loves the depth and intrigue of watercolor paintings, then shading inks might be right up your alley. If you're someone who loves the vibrancy and the joy of a little bit of glitter in your life, then please don't snooze on shimmer inks. And if you want your writing to have this otherworldly, metallic, or iridescent, scale-like effect, then please try sheen. That said, it's also important to know that shimmer and sheen can create different kinds of challenges when it comes to using your fountain pens. So, for example, some shimmer inks can clog up nibs and feeds, particularly nibs and feeds on fine pens. If you have a juicy broad, then please use the shimmer and the sheen to your heart's content. It will most likely work well, but also look the most beautiful out of those pens. That said, I'm a fine nib user and I use shimmer inks all of the time, and I've never had a problem with clogging. I go back to my previous tip and suggest that perhaps you stay just a little bit more vigilantly on your cleaning and maintenance routine, and you should have no issues at all. I mean, shimmer inks are made to be put in fountain pens. It's not like you're pouring craft glitter into your converter. So they are meant to perform well in fountain pens, and there's no need for cautionary tales like mine to scare you off from trying shimmer and sheen inks if you want to. On that vein, sheening inks can also smear and take longer to dry than regular inks. So bear that in mind if you're a left-handed writer or you're someone who tends to write on the go a lot and need to be able to quickly close your book, and you don't have the luxury of leaving your book out open for half a day in order to let the inks dry. The same can be said about the type of paper that you use it on. So recently, I've been swatching all my ink collections as well as some samples that I've received from friends into these 2 swatching books. So I've got a Traveler's Notebook for Midori MD paper, and I've got the 2025 Hobonichi freebie for Tomoe River paper. And I almost forgot that inks take so much longer to dry on Tomoe River paper than they do on Midori paper. So my Midori notebook, I was able to swatch, wait 15 minutes, check that there was nothing looking particularly damp, close my book and not have any problems with it transferring. I almost did the same at the same time with my Tomoe River notebook, only to realize that there were still pools of ink sitting on top of my swatches, and it really needed another 24 hours to sit out before everything looked set enough for me to close the book. My sixth lesson learned is try before you buy whenever you can. And I know it's not possible for some of you who might live in smaller towns that don't have fountain pen stores, and you might not have any friends in real life who love fountain pens. But wherever you can and wherever it is possible, please try at the minimum to go into a store and write a few lines with a fountain pen that you have your eye on to check how it feels in your hand. Maybe that pen doesn't work with your natural writing angle. Maybe it doesn't feel good in your hands and it's too heavy, it's too thick, it's too thin, it's too light. Whatever reason it is that it doesn't sit comfortably in your hand, it's better to know that before you purchase it from an online store. So my experience, of course, was someone who tried the Lamy Safari and liked the way that pen felt in my hand, and then thought that the CP1 would be exactly the same, only to find that the weight and the girth were completely unsuitable for me. And I also didn't learn my lesson then because I couldn't find any place where I could try out pens in person. So I did do a lot of research before I purchased my Pilot E95S, and thank goodness that gamble paid off. But I would only make that mistake later on when I purchased my TWSBI Diamond 580 because I heard incredible things about TWSBI. I also did my research, but I didn't realize that the Diamond 580 is significantly heavier than the TWSBI Eco entry-level pen. So here I thought I was upgrading, but it took me quite a while to get used to the weight of this Diamond 580, leading to quite a few writing sessions in the first few months of using this pen where I found it disappointingly fatiguing. I also had the experience of discovering a local fountain pen retailer and going into their store, but they did not have the resources and the infrastructure to allow people to test their pens. I believe they may have had some entry-level pens available in a testing format, like let's say one Lamy Safari that they kept in oven under the counter for people to try. But I was interested in this pen specifically, and it was $500 in store, and they would not let me try it out. I couldn't even tell if I wanted a fine or a medium. I couldn't tell if it was a wet writer or a dry writer. I couldn't test out whether the hardness of the platinum nibs was something that I could get used to. And I made the difficult decision of walking away when I was actually quite keen to purchase this pen. And it wasn't until about a year later when I was able to purchase this pen from a different store. I don't find that online reviews are very informative for how the pen is going to feel, even though I've been lucky with a couple of purchases based purely on reviews. But nowadays, I don't really put too much into when people say, oh, this is very comfortable for me. Oh, the threads are so smooth, they don't cut into my fingers. Oh, this weight is perfect. Because I don't know how big their hands are. I don't know how they write, what is their natural angle or the grip that they hold their pens. I can tell, but it's completely different from watching a video online to me holding that pen in my hands as I write. So for that reason, because somebody else might say, hey, I'm very comfortable using this pen, I don't necessarily find that I will have the exact same experience. An example for me is that Daisy, the co-owner of Yosaka Stationery, has shared in her videos that she finds the Pro Gear Slim very comfortable to hold in her hands. In fact, she said that she might find it even more comfortable than the larger Pro Gear. And she admits that she doesn't have very large hands, but because I can't be there and like hold my hand up to hers and say, "Hey, Daisy, show me how big your hands are," I purchased it. And after 2 full years of using my Pro Gear Slims almost every day, I can confess that the Pro Gear Slim is maybe just a hair too thin for me to write comfortably for long writing sessions. So I am someone who probably would prefer the Pro Gear size, though that said, I've never held a Pro Gear yet. Now that I've learned that lesson, that may be the one that I'm most passionate about over any of the others. So whenever I have someone in my life, either that I meet at a fountain pen journaling meetup or one of my friends or colleagues express an interest in fountain pens, I almost obnoxiously aggressively open up my pen case and hold it out under their nose and say, take whichever one you want. Don't give it back until you've written with it every single day for 3 months. Please don't spend this money until you're absolutely positive you're going to love the pen. And of course, we know that there are slight differences with how pens perform out of the box. So in my 2024 stationery flops video, when I shared that my Pilot Vanishing Point was one of my most disappointing purchases, particularly because I chose to ink it up in platinum carbon black, unexpectedly, wolves descend on me in the comment section, basically saying, "How dare you attack my absolute favorite pen and favorite ink combination of all time? There's something wrong with your pen, or there's something wrong with you." And it was quite a big wake-up call that just because a pen or an ink doesn't work well for me, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work beautifully, maybe in another batch of that ink, maybe in a different climate, and maybe with a different quality control through the pen manufacturer. Another lesson that I learned, but I don't hear a lot of fountain pen content creators talk about regularly, is that I find new pens are a lot like new shoes in that they generally need a little bit of breaking in for them to start working optimally. There are very few pens that I own that worked perfectly out of the box. And unfortunately, there are some pens I own that never worked well, even after many, many months of use. But almost all of my other pens would work poorly or disappointingly in the first week. But after I stick with it, it tends to ease in. So whether that is because right outside of the box, the nib tines are a little bit too stiff, too tight, and they just need that continual pressure of writing in order to soften up or smooth out, whether that is the act of writing itself kind of adjusts the nib to your particular writing angle. But I find that almost every single one of my favorite pens perform better now than they did when I first purchased them. So indeed, when I first purchased my Pilot Custom 823, the first few days, I did think to myself, "Oh my goodness, did I make a very, very expensive mistake?" But after sticking with it, it very quickly became a smooth, wet, beautiful writer. Although I complained about the Diamond 580, again, the first week I really struggled to get into this pen, but a combination of either breaking in the nib or strengthening the muscles in my hand to adapt to the weight of this pen, I now again find that it is a beautiful writer, and I wouldn't hesitate to pick this pen up for long writing sessions. I will say my Sailor Pro Gear Slims didn't have as extensive of a breaking in period as some of the others that I just named. So these three pens, I would say, performed very close to optimally right out of the box. My eighth piece of advice is the storage position for your pens can matter. So ideally for everyday writing, you should store your pens on its side. That keeps your feed and your nib inked up so that the pen will most likely flow beautifully when you uncap it and begin a writing session. If you are carrying it around, let's say if you are traveling and flying, keeping your pen upright is usually a smart idea in order to minimize the chances of the ink burping with air pressure changes and leaking all throughout the cap, or worse, all over your luggage. I do find now, though, that when I travel, I prefer taking pens with a valve like my custom 823, where I can secure the valve, and that has really prevented any kind of burping and leaking from happening when I'm flying. It's generally not advisable to store your pens nib down for very, very long periods. So doing this can sometimes cause a lot of leakage problems. And when you've got light colored pen bodies, such as my Kaweco iridescent pearl, it means that you'll find that the cap becomes completely soaked with the ink in the pen. And if you don't wash it out regularly, it can stain the pen. My ninth piece of advice: please use your pens, don't just collect them. I am a big fan of using my nice things every day. I don't try to hoard or baby anything that I own. And fountain pens are really designed to be used. An unused fountain pen, it wouldn't be unusual over time, as collectors of vintage pens might know, for parts of the pen to start degrading, for ink to dry out in the nib or the feed. And if it's been there for too long, it can irreversibly ruin a pen. So these beautiful writing instruments are actually kept in their best condition when lovingly used on a regular basis. So please don't be too precious about them, even if you choose to add a few expensive ones to your collection, because they are designed to inject that little bit of magic in your everyday. And so please let them. And the 10th point is the fountain pen community has just exploded in the last 10 years, actually, the last 13 years since I bought my Lamy CP1. There is no shortage of generous, passionate people who are excited to share with you everything they love, whether it might be someone in your life like me who would be more than happy to penable you and have you try some of their fountain pens, to borrow their fountain pens to see if you like them before you take the leap and make a purchase. But they are also there to help you with any troubleshooting issues, with any problems that you might be having, to suggest workarounds and solutions to any struggles that you might have with your fountain pens. And those people do not necessarily work at fountain pen stores, but they are on Reddit, they are definitely on YouTube, they may be on Instagram and TikTok. And most of us, speaking as a fellow fountain pen lover, we would be more than happy to talk with you about your dilemmas or your challenges and the issues that you're facing, or the concerns and trepidations that you might have about getting into the fountain pen hobby. So please don't be afraid to reach out, to ask for help, and to ask for advice. I am still learning so much every day about fountain pens, and it is through the generosity of this community that I have learned to use and appreciate my fountain pens better than I ever have just in the last 8 months. Finally, I want to end on a little bonus lesson. The fountain pen hobby can be slow and soothing, and you can let it be. One of the most beautiful things about owning and using fountain pens is how it gets me to reconnect with a slower pace of living. I am someone who functions quite well doing my organizing and my planning on digital calendars and to-do lists on my phone. But I crave this beautiful respite from an otherwise productive life under late stage capitalism to sit down and pull out a beautiful instrument that was so thoughtfully designed and manufactured and just luxuriate in the beauty of pen on paper. Getting into fountain pens as a new mother was one way that I found some peace and some grounding in an otherwise very overwhelming and hectic life. It was a lifeline back to myself, back to connecting with my creative expression, also processing my thoughts and my emotions during that whirlwind in order to find my way back to who I am and my new identity as a mother. Yes, fountain pens can just be tools to scribble down your shopping list and to tick off the tasks you were meant to do each day. But they can also be powerful tools of creativity and healing. So find your way into the fountain pens and don't let other people dictate to you how you should be using your pens, which ones you ought to collect, and what makes you a quote unquote real fountain pen user. If you're completely new to fountain pens, don't be discouraged if things don't work perfectly out of the box. And certainly don't be like me and run away screaming from the fountain pen hobby for 10 years. But try a different pen, try a different ink, try a different paper, and take your time adjusting to the fountain pen, letting your hand and your writing style adapt. This is a hobby with so much beauty, but it can be easy to fall prey to external pressures and expectations. So hold on to the core of what you love about writing with fountain pens and let that lead you through the hobby in finding your own fountain pen piece. So, with my 10, or in actuality 11, pieces of advice out of the way, I would actually like to take some time to talk about the incredible content creators out there that have helped teach me about this hobby. I'm going to use this opportunity to shine a light on some of the content creators that I think might be a little bit underrated and I think deserve so much more recognition than they have. My favorite fountain pen podcast has to be the Gourmet Pens Club, which is hosted by Aziza and Candace. I have loved their episodes. I love the dialogue between the two hosts and the different personalities and expertise that they each bring into their discussions. And I think between the two of them, there is a fount of wisdom. And I have virtually learned everything that I know about fountain pens through their advice. Particularly, I think it was Candace who may have prompted me to try out different papers to discover that there was a trifecta between the pen, the ink, and the paper. Of course, I say they're a bit underrated with a hint of irony because I do actually think they are very, very popular. But I find with podcasts, it's always hard to tell because I'm listening to it alone and there's really no statistics that I can find on the number of downloads or comments and likes. And so it's very hard for me to tell, am I the only person listening to this or am I one of millions? And so I do actually think they're extremely well known and well respected in the fountain pen community, but I still think they deserve even more attention and love. A YouTuber who has probably inspired me the most when it comes to collecting my fountain pens with intention is Lau from Kenshin Crafts. He has a incredibly impressive collection of fountain pens and one of the most stunning collections of Leonardo's. The way that he talks about his pens and his relationship with the pens and his genuine delight and awe over their beauty and their chatoyance, which might be his favorite word, I think. I really, really adore his videos and I've learned so much from Lal. So I'd also like to shine a light on some fountain pen YouTubers who might be a little bit lesser known, but whose content nevertheless have given me so much insight and delight. I'd like to recommend Jenny from A Year and a Day, who I think I may have discovered after she commented on some of my older videos, but I haven't seen her for a while. And I know in the last 4 months, she's only put out 2 videos, but I don't think she's closed her channel. Irrespective, her archive of videos are so wonderful to watch. She is one of the few creators that fits in the middle of the Venn diagram between two of my interests, fountain pens and journaling, as well as tarot cards. She has a beautifully relaxing speaking style. And every time I settle into one of her videos, it just feels like a cozy catch up with an old friend. I also have been a long-time fan of Bucky from Bucky's Baubles. They go by the username Autistic Bucky, and they don't produce videos as frequently as when they first started their channel, but I really love Bucky's videos. I believe they do a regular currently inked video, and usually I don't tend to like watching those videos very much. But Bucky has a way of choosing just the most beautiful pen and ink combinations, and they have a very interesting overriding style that I find simply fascinating to watch. So, Bucky is somebody that I really love, and even when they've slowed down with their posting, when their video comes up, within the first day, I'm usually on it. Another fountain pen YouTuber who may have either slowed down or stopped their YouTube channel, but whose incredible archive of videos still give me a lot of joy to watch is Justice from Justice Space. I think I discovered Justice maybe a year and a half ago when I was an avid watcher of Goulet Pen's Pencast, and I started noticing that Justice would pretty much comment on every single one of their videos with informative, thoughtful, and kind comments. It got me quite curious, and I checked if she had her own channel, and I was delighted to find that she made so many videos about her fountain pen collection and her love of stationery. And I really, really love her videos. She is also someone a little bit like Kenshin Crafts who has a much bigger, much more impressive fountain pen collection than I might dream of owning. But the way that she talks about each and every one of them, the stories that she associates with them, I think she shares a story about how she had a Twisby stolen from a lecture theatre, and oh my gosh, she's such a good storyteller that I really feel it when she's sharing all of her fountain pen memories. So even though she doesn't post regularly anymore, her archive of videos are well worth watching. There are also 3 YouTubers that I've had the immense pleasure to get to know because of my channel. I want to give a shout out to Michael from Michael in the Margins, who first told me that he started a channel a couple of months ago, but he's honestly become one of my favorite YouTubers. Just like Bucky, when Michael releases a video, I usually jump on it right away, with the exception that sometimes I'll save it for when I know that I might be having a rough day with like an intense day of work, and I want to save his video as a pick me up at the end of a long working day. He talks about his Hobonichis, and he's quite recently gotten into the fountain pen hobby and his ink swatches, his fountain pen hobby meetups. They're just such wonderful, genuine, happy stories, and I've really, really loved following Michael. As from Azia Elga Palance is also someone that I've become a fan of. Her videos mostly are about her planners, and she has a great plotter setup and tour that really inspired me as I'm moving into a rings binder. Az has such a thoughtful, gentle approach to stationery, and I believe is also quite new to the fountain pen hobby, often through a combination of her videos and the wonderfully thoughtful comments that she leaves on mine. I've really appreciated getting to know Az. I hope her schedule allows her to make many, many more videos because every single one of them is a delight to watch. And finally, I want to give a shout out to Risa from Tiger Risa, who used to comment quite regularly on my videos, but I haven't seen them for a few months. And she told me she was getting into making videos for YouTube. And then she floored me with one of the most stunning videos ever made about a fountain pen, I think, which was her first ever fountain pen. I think it was the TWSBI Eco Espresso Bronze. And she made the most luscious video showing it off. Somehow it made me hungry and want the pen at the same time. Although she hasn't posted very much since, and it may be that she's decided not to continue with her channel, I still think it's worth hopping over to her account and watching that stunning video. So, Risa, if there's any chance you're watching this video, I want you to know that your videos were very, very much appreciated. So, thank you so much for joining me today in this discussion of the 10 things I wish I knew before I started getting into fountain pens. It's been such a pleasure every week to show up here and to share in this passion and to hear your compassionate and kind advice, suggestions, and inspirations week after week. I wish you all a lovely week ahead, and I can't wait to see you in a week's time. Take very good care of yourselves. Bye bye.